The young woman putting poetry into her brand of hip-hop, an exhibition that captures the spirit of a generation, and fashion fanatics in New York get their annual opportunity to peacock on the pink carpet at the Met Gala. That's all coming up in today's show. First, writing verse might come naturally for most rappers, but few of them have their poetry published before they hit the charts. Jamila Woods, though, is not your average R&B and hip-hop star. We sat down with her on the release of her sophomore album, Legacy, to talk about the influential black artists from history who feed into what she does.
Hi, this is Jamila Woods, and you're watching France 24.
Jamila Woods, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, for your second studio album, Legacy, you named each of the songs after an influential cultural figure. It's an interesting concept for a record. How did that idea come to you?
It came about kind of organically. I had written a song called Giovanni, the first single, basically inspired by Nikki Giovanni's poem Ego Trippin', which I teach a lot in my poetry workshops. And then I happened to write another song inspired by a poem about muddy waters. And at that point, I kind of like when I can notice a pattern in what I'm doing. And so I just made a list of people who I would like to write songs about, or songs titled after, who mean a lot to me. And I just tried to see if I could do it. And it kind of grew into a project from there.
If you really want something done, and done well, do it yourself. Nobody else can do it for you.
And Giovanni, I believe your family are featured in the music video. How did that happen?
Well, I asked my grandma, would you be in my music video? And she said, all right. Because she's always like, why are you putting my name in all your songs? Why do you keep doing that? But I think she actually secretly likes it. She just is kind of, she's just funny that way.
And the latest single is called Zora, after Zora Neale Hurston, that cult literary figure. Can you tell us a little bit more about her?
Yes, I love Zora Neale Hurston. She was an author of a lot of different kinds of books. She wrote novels. She wrote more essays about culture and black culture, and she did a lot of like anthropological work in the South. And during her time, I think she was kind of controversial because a lot of her writing would write in the dialect of Gullah people, or the way black people actually would talk, and it was a politics of representation at the time where that was seen as something that was kind of risque to do. But I love her essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me, which really talks about how she came to understand her blackness.
Must be disconcerting how I discombobulate. I've always been the only, every classroom, every home. Piece of chocolate on the moon.
The video for Zora was shot at Chicago's Stony Island Arts Bank. You're a Chicago native, and I believe the city's a bit of a muse for you. Can you tell us how it influences your music?
I think for me, Chicago is very inspiring because there's so much history, especially in terms of the black art that's been created in the city. And I think places like the Stony Island Arts Bank are amazing because you can go there and, for me, learn about pieces of my history that I've never been taught in a school setting. So they have an archive of the Johnson Publishing House, which is the place that published Jet magazine and the early Ebony magazines. And so for me, it was just really exciting to incorporate that into the video and have that be kind of the setting for the video.
Now, people talk about the Me Too era, or even the post-Me Too era, and sometimes in a critical way, talking about groups of women who are underrepresented sometimes. How do you think the voices of black women are being heard today?
Black women are often the most ignored and the most marginalized groups of people. You mentioned the Me Too movement, and I think in Chicago, particularly post the R. Kelly documentary that's come out, I think there's been a lot of conversation around, you know, why it took so long to have accountability around that particular instance, and that largely being because it was Black women who were often the victims or survivors of that abuse. And so I think it's definitely an ongoing issue of Black women being kind of invisible, or their issues not being seen as worth fighting for.
She's telepathic, call it black girl magic. Yeah, she scares the government. Deja vu atonement. She don't give up. Yeah, she don't give up. She don't give up. No, she don't give up.
Aside from your music, you also are a poet, and you published your first work in 2012. How did that come about? Were you always writing poetry as a child?
I really wasn't. It kind of came about a little bit by accident, because there's this after-school program in Chicago that will pay young people to have them apprentice in a certain genre. And I applied to do the singing one, and I didn't get in, and they put me in the poetry one, and I was like, kind of frustrated. But after a few weeks of the program, I fell in love with poetry, and ever since then it kind of changed the path of my life. And I wanted to go to school in a place that had a poetry scene. I wanted to pursue theater and things that would help me get stronger as a performer. So it was a really valuable experience for me to be introduced to poetry and spoken word.
Slowly taking in my body like it's holy. I've been waiting for you for the whole week. I've been praying for you on my Sunday.
And you worked with Chance the Rapper on the track Sunday Candy. That brought you to a wider audience, perhaps some of his fans, and you worked with him again after that. Do you have any specific artistic collaborations on your to-do list, people you really want to work with?
I would love to work with Little Dragon. I love that band, and Frank Ocean is really one of my favorite artists. So yeah, but a lot of times with collaborations, there's so many people who I'd want to work with, but it would have to take a certain, like, I like to be intentional about collaborations, because when people are like, let's collab, like, that can be cool, but it can also feel like too forced sometimes. So I like to think of like what would be a conversation I'd want to have with this person, and what would be the right context, and really be intentional as like a form of respect, I think.
Thank you very much, Jamila Woods, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The so-called millennial generation is the subject of plenty of debate. Leading a hyper-connected lifestyle, they're also seen as less secure than their elders. But what about their artistic take on the world? The Cartier Foundation here in Paris has brought together 21 young artists from all over the European continent, many of whom are at the start of their careers. France 24's reporters went along to check out that exhibition.
Roam through 29 countries and discover more than 200 artists. Over the course of 1 year, a team from the Fondation Cartier took the pulse of the artistic scene across Europe. One of the most surprising finds, the work of Georgian artist Nika Kutartaladze.
It was a house in the village of his paternal family that he brought back to Tbilisi and literally built into a social housing apartment block typical of the former USSR. You had to actually enter the building and then enter the apartment to confront this confusing but very exciting installation.
Through these encounters, the museum has created an exhibition around the theme of metamorphosis. 21 artists, all born between 1980 and 1994, coming from 16 different countries. Originally from Syria, Miriam Haddad studied fine arts in Damascus before coming to France to complete her training at 21.
When I was in Syria, what I would look at most would be soutine, kokoschka, but when I arrived here, I discovered contemporary artists. It was here that I really began to build my creative practice.
Kostas Lambridis comes from Athens, but it was in the Netherlands that he designed this piece, inspired by the badminton cabinet, a Florentine work from the 17th century.
I borrowed the form and the size, but I decided to reverse this hierarchy in the material. I'm using minerals, but I'm using all minerals, or I'm using metal and wood, but any kind of metal or wood. So I really don't think that one material is better than the other, or I can combine bronze with broken plastic chairs or ebony wood with MDF.
At the centre of many of these young artists' work lies a preoccupation with transformations, recycling, and looking towards the past for inspiration to create anew.
And finally, forget about Fashion Week. For style-loving celebrities, the only red carpet to be on this week was, in fact, pink. The Met Gala ball saw the wildest, wackiest looks paraded on the steps of the New York Museum, and the theme this year was inspired by Susan Sontag's essay, Notes on Camp. Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, Serena Williams and Celine Dion were among the stars headed inside, where they got a preview of that new exhibition. It's entitled Camp, Notes on Fashion, and includes more than 250 objects exploring that exuberant aesthetic. For those of you who didn't manage to make it into the gala, we'll leave you with a glimpse of that show. Remember, you can get more arts and culture on our website, and you can also keep up with us on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 just after this.
What exactly is camp? Camp is the sizzle without the steak. Camp is the heroism of people not called upon to be heroes. Taste is a kind of love for human nature. Camp is extravagant posing. Camp is a woman walking around in a dress made of 3 million feathers. Camp is a holiday for consenting adults. Camp is big business. Camp is eternally hopeful. Camp is a refusal to grow up. Camp is generous. Camp is happiness. Camp is a question mark that won't let its line be straightened into an exclamation point.